let's get back to some analysis. And we're gonna start with a Fabiano Caruana game. Go USA, go USA. Oh no, please. My European viewers are gonna be like, but I thought they're gonna be like, how dare you root for your countrymen? And I'm gonna say, aren't you supposed to be sleeping? Okay, so Caruana versus Donchenko. Now remember, Donchenko was a replacement player in the tournament. So Dubov couldn't make the tournament. They called Donchenko up, who was pretty well rated, and he's living in Europe, right? So they're like, hey, can you get over here? Because Dubov withdrew, and we need you. We need a new punching bag, right? And Donchenko was like, I would love to be a punching bag. In fact, he put it in writing. They said, okay, listen, we need a disclosure that you're willing to be the punching bag of the tournament, but you have to sign it because, we don't want any liability. And he said, sure, I'll sign any papers you want to be the tournament punching bag. I'm happy to be there for you guys. Thank you so much. So they invited Donchenko in after he signed the waivers, and he's playing in the tournament. Okay, so now we are going to look at one of his games. And if Donchenko watches this, oh God, he's going to be sending me, I will play you in a blitz match and destroy you, kid. I'm going to rip you to shreds. I'm going to be like, it's okay. All right. Donchenko versus Caruana. So we're going to give Donchenko a little bit of a break now because he's playing number 2 in the world, Fabiano Caruana. And he's also 150 rating points below Caruana. So he's the underdog, though he has the white pieces. So let's see if he can do a little something with it, okay? So D4, D5, C4, C6, so Caruana going for a Slav. Now, the thing is, so in my chess life and, my openings had always been designed against the weaker player. So I played a little bit sketchy openings on purpose to confuse weaker players, but to be able to get dynamic positions to where they couldn't make them too simple. Now, if I was Caruana in this scenario, I would be a little bit concerned to play the Slav if I'm trying to win or trying to keep the chances alive because of the sterilizing exchange variation of the Slav. Now, here's the thing. There's still a board full of pieces, of course. But the fixed and symmetrical pawn structure takes a little bit of the sting out of this or the counter chances out of this for black. And so, personally, I never played the Slav because all the other lines of the Slav are very cool and very dynamic. But the exchange Slav, it would be like torture. And the thing is, it's a pretty popular weapon right now. Like, people are playing the exchange Slav as white for the advantage. And when you get this super symmetrical position, only white can really try to pull there. So, of course, there's still a game to be played here. But Donchenko doesn't do that. He plays the move knight f3. Okay, so that's good. So knight f6. And then e3, the slow Slav. Okay, so you block in the bishop, and you don't, you don't want any trouble. Okay, because you could play knight to c3. Yeah, so if knight c3, black has the option of going into the semi-Slav or the mainline Slav, and so white has to know a lot more in that particular situation. So pawn e3 was played, and this was very popular until the exchange Slav started to become a thing. Bishop to f5, so you play the Slav, in hopes to get your bishop out, so there you go. Knight c3, pawn e6, and then this particular situation, there's really only one move here that white can play if white wishes to challenge black in any way. The only real way for white to put the pressure on black in this particular scenario is to go knight h4. Going after the bishop pair, right? Because then white could say, okay, you got your bishop out, but I'm going to trade my knight for your bishop, And at least in the long run, I'm going to have this mysterious bishop pair that everyone talks about, and I'll therefore have an advantage. Because with so many pawns on the board, when you have the bishop pair, you can later open up the game for those bishops, and you will have an advantage. Okay, but it's a very long-term play. Okay, so Caruana, there are many ways to play this position for black. Caruana plays the move bishop to e4. Donchenko plays the main move, which is f3. You push the bishop back. So bishop goes back to g6. Now, Caruana's like, well, at least I got you to play f3, making your pawn structure a little bit less flexible. I know you're eventually going to take my bishop, but at least your kingside pawn structure has become a little weaker. And when you take my bishop, I'm going to have this semi-open h-file to work with. So, okay, bishop to d2, Donchenko waiting a little bit, bishop to e7, and then finally he takes the knight. Okay, what's the trade-off in this position? So we already know that white has the bishop pair. Does black have anything that they can hang their hat on and say, you're right. You have the bishop pair. Shoot. Maybe, what are we going to do, right? Okay, so black says you have the bishop here. Is there anything to say for black's position? Can you look at black's position and say, hey, but I've got this, So black gets this little half open h-file for the rook. Having said that, black's king is in the middle, so, you don't want to leave your king in the middle too long to try to justify this rook being open, because, it could blow up in your face. But black has also a very compact pawn structure and no bad pieces. There's this long-term issue of like the bishop pair, but a lot's going to happen before that becomes a clear asset for white. Okay, so white's like, well, I don't really want to castle into your attack, so I'm going to castle to the queen side. And Caruana developed his pieces. So castle. Caruana played the move a6, and Donchenko played g4. So there's a big fight going on here in this sort of castles, I would say opposite side castles, but black hasn't castled yet. Okay, but in a very rich position where each side may elect to pawn storm the other. Okay. And so very dynamic situation because the kings are very likely to be on opposite sides of the board. So I have a question for you. Caruana played a6, and clearly a6 telegraphs that he wants to go b5. My question for you is, should you capture first and then go b5, or should you play b5 immediately? That's my question for you. Think about the pros and cons of both of those moves and then type it in the chat. Yeah, so the correct answer is pawn captures first, and that's what Caruana played. The problem with b5 is which move. Which move can white play here, which kills black's counterplay? Exactly. Very good. Very good, everyone. c5. And in an opposite side castle's position, or, in this case, the castle versus not castle, where we're doing a pawn storm, we want to make sure that the flank of the board where we're doing our pawn storm has potential to open up. Well, white bypasses this and closes it, and black doesn't have a way to pry through over here because it's just 2-on-2. And now that the queen side is pretty closed, white still has breaks in the middle with e4. There's breaks on the king side with h5. There's f5. There's, white holds all the pawn breaks in the center and on the king side. So there's no reason to play b5 first unless you and your opponent made an agreement that they had to capture. Assuming that you didn't make that agreement and that they could play the move c5 and block all that down, you shouldn't play b5 first. You want to ensure that you're going to have pawn breaks and open lines on the side of the board where you're doing your pawn storm. So it was a no-brainer for Caruana, who played pawn takes c4, to ensure that he's going to have open lines on the queen side. And that's really important in this type of positions where it's just going to be an assault on each other's king, right? So, yeah. Bishop captures back. b5 now gains a little tempo on the bishop, but really it's about prying open lines on the queen side to get at the white king. So, just black is expanding over there in hopes to open things up. Bishop drops back to e2, and then c5. Exactly, Ezra. Continuing to pry open lines on the queen side, we initiate this pawn exchange one way or the other, and we're going to open up this c-file. Well, Donchenko was like, I don't really want that to happen, the c-file to open, so I'm going to sort of kind of gambit a pawn here. So Donchenko is like, listen, I don't want to open up the c-file or really anything over there on the queen side, so I'm going to play the move d5 and sort of stuff your position a little bit and see if I can keep the queen side closed until I can get something going on your king. Well, Caruana says, all right, well, I'm taking that. Probably he didn't want to play pawn takes, because then after pawn to g5, that hits the knight away, and white would be able to recapture the center pawn with probably an advantage because he'd be opening up the center pretty good there. So it does make sense for black to take with the knight and just sort of be up a pawn. I mean, I wouldn't, if I was playing black here, I'm not sure I would cling to this pawn, this extra pawn, more than I would just find a way to possibly give it back to keep things closed in the center and continue to pursue my queen side offensive. So Donchenko is like, listen, I'm just rolling here. I need to get these pawns going. Caruana's king is still in the middle, but he's got to open up lines. You can't get at that king right now. It's like, hey, you're supposed to castle. My book says you're supposed to castle, and your book is right. But, chess can be a very circumstantial game. It really does matter exactly what's happening. So Caruana's like, well, I see what you're doing. And I remember when I first started chess coaching, I never knew how to explain this to my students, and then I started to realize, it's not that hard to explain. Okay. In chess, you have to have counterplay. Okay? So, even if you can't see it all the way through, when your opponent is doing something, pawn storm or whatever, very rarely is the correct response to try to halt the pawn storm or to try to halt their offense. The most powerful defense is offense. Okay, in this case, so I am slightly changing that saying. White is becoming very aggressive. That white wants to play f5 and try to pry open the king side, try to pry open the center. There's nothing that black can really do about that, right? It's coming. You can't really halt it. It's not a position where you can really play a prophylactic move. So you need to drum up action for yourself, right? That's chess. Chess is not like, oh, my opponent has all the ideas and I've got none. Then it's impossible to be good. You got to say, oh, I see my opponent's idea. Is it possible to stop? Not really. Is it possible to distract them with counterplay? Oh, yes. Okay, so what does Caruana do here? Because it does matter. And Caruana, of course, played very accurately. He's the number 2 player in the world, so we expect nothing less from such a great player. But he knew that he has to create counterplay. He has to create threats toward white. So what does he do here? Anyone have an idea? Type it in chat. Very good. B4. Good job, guys. Yep, B4. Can somebody with words explain what b4, or with move, you can just tell me what opportunity does b4 open up for Caruana in general? What does b4 open up? Exactly. So it introduces the idea of queen out to a5. So it blocks this bishop, and it introduces the idea of queen out to a5, attacking on the queen side. And so he's opening up doors for his own counterplay. So that's one of many things. It also, because of this bishop block, it stops moves like bishop to c3, which would attack the g-pawn and open up the d-file for the rook. So b4 is a multi-purpose move, all in direction of black's counterplay, and in a way to stop white from opening up his pieces. Well, Donchenko hits Caruana again. He says, open it up. Please, open up that center for me. Look at your king and your queen. I want my rooks barreling down the E and D file. Please, world number 2, Caruana, American number 1, open it up. What did Caruana do? He's like, you think I was born yesterday, man? I'm the world number 2, and I played for a world championship match. You think I'm gonna do you any favors? No, I don't think so. Chill Maz, very good. Very good. D4. He's like, I'm shutting all that down. Okay? There will be no... You might be able to open up lines, but you're not going to do it that easy. You think I'm just going to allow you to take, or you think I'm going to take and open up these lines for you just because you want to? No way, man. Closing that thing down. Donchenko played e5. And again, he's, one of the very sneaky little moves he has here is the move pawn to e6. And e6 is a very sneaky move, because after pawn to e6, if you take with your f-pawn, then suddenly the queen hits this pawn and attacks the king. Remember, anytime you have a pawn chain, even if it's just a little pawn chain, like this one, always look for attacks at the pawn chain's base, right? You always have to look at those little pawn jabs. So Caruana's like, okay, I see you. I see what you're doing. I certainly do not want the move e6 to come in with tempo, where you're attacking my knight and you're attacking my pawn. I don't want that to happen. So Caruana played knight b6. So he's like, yeah, you can play e6, but I can do something about that. Well, Donchenko was like, okay, e6. And Caruana, as some of you are noting in the chat, some of you were suggesting that Donchenko should have played king to b1, which is a very useful move in castle's queenside position to include. Well, he didn't. So Caruana said, I got something for you. Queen d5. That's my defense. I'm going to let you take this pawn on f7, but I'm going to hide in front of your own pawn. Your own pawn is going to block you. That's what happened. Your own pawn's going to block your pieces from coming in to attack me. In the meantime, I'm hitting you in the Achilles heel of the castle's queenside position, which is the a2 square, unprotected pawn. So I'm hitting you right there on that a2 square. And if you try to guard it with king to b1 now, I bum rush you with my pawns. And I'm going to wipe you off the board. It's too little too late now. Okay? The queen also supports this pawn advance along with the knight. Now this, and this are all coming through. Black's counterplay is much greater than white's, because even though it looks like this pawn sort of made it into black's position, that's the only piece that made it into black's position. Okay? And it ain't really anything to write home about. Okay? In fact, it's blocking any action, and all of white's other pieces aren't really doing anything. So Donchenko made the decision to play h4. But as you guys can sense, all these pawn moves aren't really yielding what they should be. I mean, this is like, where are you going with this? You think I'm going to give you 800 moves what are you even going for, right? So Caruana said, give me that. And then Donchenko said, well, give me that. And Caruana's like, yeah, whatever, bro. It's like, your pieces you can't get to my king. Your pawn is blocking any possibility. And you can't checkmate me with just your queen. You don't have enough action. So Caruana says, just plants that pawn right into b3. And you say, okay, pawn b3. Now, if this queen does not remain on this diagonal, then queen a1 is checkmate, right? Let's say, I don't know. I take the knight. Free knight, right? Caruana gave me a free knight, right? Just think about it. Just saying that, I'm getting nauseous, okay? Just saying, the world number 2 player allowed me to take his knight in one move. Oh, yeah, really? Okay, how about this? How about this? And then Caruana drops the mic. How do you like those apples? Now, of course, Donchenko is a very strong player. He's not going to allow that. So he plays bishop to e1. And this actually makes some sense because he's at least, even though, running with the king is not going to be a pleasant experience for white, it is an opportunity to escape. Okay? And Caruana's just like rolling. He plays c4. This is like amazing move. Because he's still offering this knight. That's what I love about this move. He's still offering this knight despite the fact that white was like, hey, I opened up a place for my king. Because it's checkmate. It just checkmate in 2 moves this time. Hence the move c4, which took away the d3 square, and of course all other squares are covered. Right? So, just a checkmate. So, of course, the world number 2 did not give away his knight again, so he played c4. Donchenko took this pawn on d4, and now Caruana threw another piece at him with knight 4. And I just want to point out again how this pawn, remember when Caruana declined to capture that pawn, even though he could have, and he's using it as a shield to his own king? That's pretty common in chess. You should remember that concept. Oh, I could take that pawn, or I could just hide in front of it where white's own pawn blocks avenues to my king. Oh, it's like, maybe that's a good idea. Okay, so knight a4. So we're attacking this pawn on b2, of course. Queen back to b1. And only one move wins here. But it's a move. Okay? Black to play. What is black's move? Only one move wins. What is it? It's a nice move. And it was played, of course. Caruana is a machine. Okay, so I see multiple answers in the chat. So I see knight takes b2 doesn't work because after queen takes a2, then king takes b2 and white's just winning there. So not knight takes b2. Pawn c3, which some are suggesting, I still take here. And then I take the knight and stop the pawn from promoting. So as people on Twitch would say, Sag. And finally, the correct move, which many of you have put in the chat, is bishop to a3. Now that's a move. Bishop to a3 is that's a real deal right there. So number one, if you take my queen, because you do in theory want to trade because you're getting attacked, but you can't trade. Because, I mean, how are you going to stop this pawn? You're not going to stop that pawn. Okay, so in this particular situation, something very cool happened. He did trade queens. We're going to look at that. But, okay, the game is over regardless. If pawn takes bishop, though, what was the point? What really good move here does Caruana have? What was the point of playing bishop a3 otherwise? b2. Very good. Burn. That just hurts. That hurts so bad. Because if you move away from the queen, then you just take the queen. So if you go king to c2, after queen to b3 check, I'm going to get this with check. And then I'm still going to be beating the heck out of you. You know, like, I mean, some position like this. And here come these pawns too, right? And my rook. Yeah. So bishop a3, you can't capture that. So Donchenko did, and by the way, this is a threat. This is now a bigger threat. So Donchenko took the queen. Here comes this pawn about to promote, and then played king to c2, which is a pretty sneaky move, because if you queen, then bishop to b4 check picks up the queen back. And even though this position is probably still good for black, it's more complicated than it needs to be. And it's not that clear. So, of course, Caruana, the American machine, the Italian-American machine, after king c2, played rook b8. He's like, you know, this pawn is so great, and now I'm going to get my rook into the game too. He's like, that little pawn on a2, that's going to be causing you big headaches. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. I don't want to let you any complicated scenario. Rook d8 was played. This is a distraction in an effort to try to, to try to stop what's happening over here. But after rook takes d8, pawn takes a3. Keep in mind, if you promote, same thing, bishop to b4 check, picking up the queen, but Caruana is too good to fall for that one. Caruana said, I got an idea. I'm going to shut down this idea and, reinforce the promotion of this pawn. Eat it. So it's really all over but the crying here. Donchenko played bishop to g3 in an effort to use the rook to stop the pawn from promoting. But after rook to d2, white's losing all their pieces and some, because king to b3, and of course there's nothing wrong with taking this bishop. Caruana played knight to c5, and Donchenko resigned because the reality is he's just going to be down too many pieces in the resulting position. So, like, let's say I bring my king up to attack this knight. Again, there's nothing wrong with taking this bishop, but black can be greedy and play the move knight to e4. And black still has a pawn on the 7th rank about to promote. This bishop is hanging. This bishop is hanging. This pawn is still alive. This pawn is alive. This rook is alive. It's over. So Donchenko resigned.
Hi, I'm Peter Giannatos, founder of the Charlotte Chess Center. Subscribing to our YouTube channel is statistically proven to limit your blunders.